I was about to say that this service is so much about light. It's really amazing, and then we know we will. Another light, the knowing we will, together, in community, in solidarity. It is the light within our hearts and the light within our minds, joined together in wholeheartedness, that really is the light that allows us to become the change that we want to be in this world. And change is necessary. Change is definitely necessary. And so today, the racial justice team, the anti-racism team, has joined together to share some stories of their aha moments and to bring more light into the sanctuary, into our hearts and minds, and into what we understand to be the work of anti-racism. You know, the light that we've been hearing about this morning, it really first in the opening hymn, to lift me up to the light of change. Now, some of us are, you know, a little skittish about change. However, when we want to see the change in the world, we have to be the change in the world. And so lifting ourselves up, even if there is resistance, keep on lifting, and we can do that in community, as Barbara read about in Marge Piercy's piece, because there is power in community, there is strength in community, there is light in community. We also heard there is always light, there is always the light. What was that? That was the name of Barbara's reading. Now that seemed pretty heavy at the beginning, didn't it? That reading. And it ended with, yes, we can do this. There is light. So this service today is about discovering the aha moments when we can be the light we seek to be the change we seek to be in the world, and really create a world that works for everyone, no exceptions, no exceptions. And I want to add that bringing love together with the mind, together with concepts, which the Unitarian Universalists are so good at doing, bringing love into the mix is essential. And I want to read the words of John Lewis, the late, great John Lewis. Surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, just as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did, they led with love joined with the mind. And John Lewis wrote, or said, love was the engine of the civil rights movement. I risked death for love. I know this isn't a conventional view. We cared only about those who were, wait a minute, I'm sorry. We cared not only about those who were marching with us, but those who opposed us. Every human being is deserving and worthy of being loved. Now that is something to hold in our hearts, because it creates a wholeness in our work. It creates a unity that is easy to look away from. So I invite you all to remember John Lewis's words as one who had suffered greatly as a black man in this country. He kept love as a light guiding him. And now I am very happy to bring forward, to invite forward the members of the committee who will be sharing their aha moments with you. First, Penny Hall.
For the past couple of years, I've been working on writing a book. It's loosely based on the life of my great-grandmother, who lived on a tobacco plantation in Southern Virginia before and during the Civil War. There were many enslaved people working on the plantation. From that kernel, I wove a fictional story starting with the end of the war. I imagined the lives of my great-grandmother, her children and grandchildren, as well as the lives of some of the newly free black people that they knew. When I finished writing the book, several trusted friends read it and made helpful suggestions. I made some changes and decided I was ready to go ahead and self-publish my book. When I told Eli, my child, adult child, they said, "Great, Mom, but first you need to have a black sensitivity reader read it and give you some feedback." "Why?" I asked. "To see if you have inadvertently been racist in your depiction of your black characters," Eli explained. "Me? But I've fought against racism my whole life," I protested. "And I grew up with black people." "I know, Mom," they said. Still, I felt so defensive I couldn't see beyond feeling offended. But after several days, I realized I'd been making some assumptions. One was that I knew black people and their issues, so my interpretation would be true. The other assumption was that since my intentions were good, I couldn't be far off the mark. Both assumptions were white and racist, I came to see. It was very sobering. So I called a black friend from the Coalition Against Racism, who's a librarian, and she graciously read my book. She thought my depiction of black characters was acceptable and made an important literary suggestion. I still feel humbled when I reflect on how I assumed that my experience and good intentions were enough. And I plan to be working on questioning my future assumptions for some time.
Hello, I'm Addison Asbal. Awakening to my internalized racism is a journey that I travel, welcoming new revelations every day. I'm grateful for the anti-racism group for continuous love and support in my journey. As we engage in learning and discussion in the group, I peel back the layers of my privileged life and realize that my inclination for social justice activism is tied to two simple concepts: fairness and honesty. I was that little kid who said, "That's not fair," or called somebody on a lie, so that drives me. I've always felt bad in some way when becoming aware of unfair and dishonest treatment directed at me or others. And the bad feeling gets worse if I look away and accept the situation, which I am guilty of. And the bad feeling and accept the situation, usually out of a feeling of futility. That's impossible to change, I think to myself. Or a fear of negative reactions. What will people think if I speak up? What will they think about me? I've learned so much that I did not know or realize about American history in particular in this group. In the late 1990s, I had read a book titled Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong. If you haven't read it, I strongly urge you to. And I remember feeling betrayed. Betrayed by the system and outraged, both as a student and an educator. I thought we should be making changes in the history curriculum immediately as a result of that book, but there was little attention paid to it. In the anti-racism group, we paid attention, and we delved deeper into stories that purposely had been kept from our history books. I began to see ways that I could influence change. For example, I learned about a request to change the graduation policy at Cherho to allow students from the Narragansett tribe to express their heritage with tribal regalia during the graduation ceremony, and to remove specific dress requirements for all students, things that often kept them from being able to participate, like no black shoes or requiring black shoes, no sneakers, black white dresses for girls, and so on. So there was major resistance to the proposed change in the name of decorum and appearances. Many people spoke up at school committee meetings. My anti-racism group experience spurred me to speak up at the school committee meeting for the change. And it happened, not because of me, but because it was the right thing to do. And it made graduation much more inclusive and celebratory instead of a somber event for all students. I feel proud of my community for taking this step to recognize the vibrant culture of the Narragansetts instead of ignoring or resisting their existence. This may seem like an insignificant step toward equity for all, but I realize it's an important one toward understanding each other as diverse humans, and every little step counts. I no longer look away when I witness injustices, but look inward for empathy for the unfairly and dishonestly treated, and then outwardly for whatever action I can take to move toward a more fair and honest world.
Good morning. It was sometime during COVID, probably the fall of 2020. Jay and I went up to Roger Williams Park to see their Japanese garden, which I had never seen before. It was a gray day and very quiet, not a soul around. That's what happens when I look up. As we came around the corner of a wall of tall evergreens, I was suddenly surprised by another person there. I literally jumped. But what shook me was the fact that, as I quickly took in this nicely dressed 30-ish black man, my internal reaction was screaming, "Danger, black man." I am certain that message was transmitted across my face and body. At the time, I was a part of the early anti-racism group that D.L. Helfer had started after George Floyd was murdered. And we were meeting every week to share our sadness and to learn more about the historic and current day atrocities of racism. This episode at Roger Williams Park was an aha moment for me, when I realized that I too had racist views deep in my bones and that I had some serious work to do.
I think about that episode often and I feel shame about my reaction. How many times in my life had I reacted this way? Plenty. It was what I learned from my parents as we drove through certain neighborhoods in New London and were told to lock the doors. To this man, I'm sure it was one of the 1,000 microaggressions he has received his whole young life. I wish I could apologize to him. No, I wish I could undo it, but I can't. What I can do is immerse myself in activities and events that include people of color. I can travel to Providence and other areas where there is more diversity. I can read novels and watch movies written by Black writers. Because as long as I keep self-segregating, I'll never see the beauty in other people who don't look like me.
Please stand and turn to hymn number.
Said in the newsletter description of this service, while racial justice has long been a core value at UUCSC, many of us have only been moved to consider in earnest how we are personally complicit in a racist society since the murder of George Floyd in 2016. Once we dare to see the insidiousness of racism, this has been the underpinning of this society for hundreds of years, how do we unsee? It is understandable that we might want to look away because it is painful, even horrifying. But what is the cost to our society, to our souls? The question each of us must answer for ourselves is, am I willing? I'd like to close the service with the inspiring words of Harriet Tubman. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. May it be so.